Good morning, everyone. Okay, the theme that we'll be discussing today is the need for planning our urban agenda. The theme is urbanization, and we'll be looking at the theme of urbanization from GS1, GS2, GS3, and some ethical aspect also. Okay, four different papers, same theme, different dimensions. Okay, this is the context of our discussion today. Now, you all know this topic, you will be reading this topic in multiple places. But what is the takeaway for you from this session? You need to have a sense of clarity. The takeaway is looking at the entire issue of urbanization as a single unified theme. Don't look at it in silos. Okay? How do you present your answer in GS1? How do you present your answer in GS2, 3, and 4? You need to have a sense of clarity. Same issue. Okay? Because this problem statement that we are trying to address, sustainable urban agenda, is not just a problem of policy or economy, but it has an impact on society. So we'll be trying to understand how the issue of urbanization developed, why urbanization, what are the roadblocks, and how to make it better. What are the ethical dimensions of that urban agenda? Okay. So let's try to make it interactive because you all know something about this topic. It's not a very complicated topic. Okay. So what is the takeaway from this discussion? The utility of facts, the utility of using the right jargon, keywords with respect to this topic. What are the keywords? The meaning of those keywords? What is the kind of data that you have to present? Ultimately, this is not a concept class, but this is a class where you will learn how to structure your answers, what kind of data pointers you should use, and what are the case studies that we will have to remember to present our answers in a way that helps us score marks. Okay? That's the focus of the entire discussion. Now tell me, why do we need urbanization? What is urbanization, first of all? What is urbanization? I told you anything that ends with Asian, the word suffix Asian is a process. Correct. What is the process here? What process are we talking about? What is there in this process? Growth of what do you mean by urban settlements? How are they characterized? Sorry? Exactly. Urban centers are those centers where the chief economic mode of sustenance is anything but agriculture. Okay? So, a structural transformation of the economy is the primary reason. The process of urbanization begins with a structural change in the economy. When I say structural change, what do you mean? What do you mean by this structural change? This is a keyword. You need to understand this keyword. What do you mean by the structure of an economy? See, there are various sectors of our economy. You will get this in your economy classes, but you need to know what are the various sectors of economy. Primary sector, secondary, which is manufacturing, and tertiary, which is service based. Now, if you take a look at India's GDP, or if you don't know what GDP is, let's simply say, if you have 1 rupee or 100 rupees, how much of that is coming from which profession? That is the structure of that economy. How much of this 100 rupees is coming from agriculture? Somewhere around 17 to 20 rupees. How much of that is coming from manufacturing? How much of that is coming from services like IT, tourism, etc., etc. Now, primarily, almost 55 rupees is coming from this and the rest is coming from manufacturing. Okay. More than 50 actually, 55, almost 60 rupees. So only this primary sector is where you will see the rural areas. The rest two sectors are contingent on the process of urbanization. So primarily, the process of urbanization is about money. It's about opportunities, new jobs. The beginning point of urbanization as a process is therefore a structural shift in the economy. Now, which type of process should we follow? Which type of planning should we follow? That's the second question. Whether should we construct new cities or should we try to remodel the existing cities and make them better? These are the two ways you have to look at when you are looking at this process. The technical words that you use in this context are greenfield and brownfield. Please pay attention to this language. These are the kind of words that you need to replicate in your answers. Urbanization is a process driven by the structural transformation of an economy, and the strategy that we deploy has two directions. Either we go for a greenfield or a brownfield. What do you mean by this? Greenfield means building a completely new city. A case to the point being Amaravati. Okay? Brownfield means, let's say you take the case of Hyderabad. Okay? When you expand the existing city of Hyderabad, build some more agglomerations, some sub-centers, satellite towns around Hyderabad and then connect it to the main city and then call it something like Greater Hyderabad. That method of urbanization where you connect the rural and suburban areas to the main heart of the city, that kind of development is called brownfield development. These are the two strategies that we have for urbanization as a process. Now, what are the needs? How do we plan? You need to have some data, right? So, estimates of Niti Aayog and other, research says that by 2036 we'll have 60 crore people in the cities of this country. As of now, almost 60% of India's GDP, that is out of 100 rupees, almost 60 to 65 rupees is coming from cities. And we are just at a population percentage where 35% of the people live in cities. Okay? How do we accommodate more people in such a way that it doesn't destroy the ecosystem? This is the challenge we have at this point of time. We need jobs. Urbanization process cannot stop. More jobs cannot come from agriculture. There is this concept of hidden employment, disguised employment, where more number of people, even when it is not necessary, they're depending on agriculture because they have nothing else to do. So there is a need for reskilling this population. There is a need for finding out avenues to create more jobs. All of this cannot happen in one center. We need to diversify our cities. We need to diversify our jobs. So this is the whole context. Okay? Now, when you have this dichotomy where whether you can go for a greenfield or a brownfield, what is the biggest challenge for a greenfield city? Anyone? Amaravati case. What is the biggest challenge? You want to build a new city. What will be the first challenge? Land. Where will you get the land? Who will give you the land? Okay, let's say you got the land, you pooled it. Now what? Investments. Give me a reason for an investor to invest in a completely new city and wait for, I don't know how much time. When will you get your return? Let's say you have 100 rupees today. Would you rather invest it in a safe investment that will give you 10 rupees back in next 1 year, or you wait for 40, 50 years to make it double? How will you sustain for the next 40, 50 years? Who are the kind of investors who will have that waiting game patience? Not a lot of people. So it has to come from the government. Where will the government mobilize such kind of money? Especially in a context of a new state like Andhra Pradesh. Okay. How will they mobilize that kind of money? At least not in one go. You need to have many multiple tranches. So that's the first problem. Now, how about the brownfield sector? I mean, brownfield city. How will you develop that? Let's take the case of Ashok Nagar. Do you really think we can expand our roads here? Okay, even if you want it, who is going to give the land? Do you think a house owner would be happy to give away his land so that we have better roads? So the retrofitting of existing cities is a big challenge. Either we are constrained for resources of financial resources, or on the other hand we are constrained for land. So this is the dichotomy of urbanization as a process. Clear? Even if you have a clear-cut plan, even if you figured out there are some roadblocks in the urbanization process. What are the roadblocks? First, where will you generate funds? Okay. First of all, investment is the biggest problem. Even if you figure out the planning and the infrastructure needed for that city, this is the biggest problem. Okay, mobilizing finances. So where will you see this? This can be a question in your GS3 where there is a topic called mobilization of resources. So they might ask you a question, a 10 marker on the methodologies that cities can use to mobilize finances. So this can be about municipal bonds, green climate funds at a local level, strategies for raising money for local governments given the fact that they don't have taxation powers. They can ask this question: what are the present problems of taxation for local bodies? In this context, examine the avenues available for plugging the investment gap for urbanization agenda. Pros and cons. That can be one question, a standalone question. So you can use concepts like municipal bonds, zero coupon bonds, all this which will be there in your prelims level. When you are going through your basic classes, you will get these concepts: zero coupon bond, municipal bonds, state development loans as a for the urban body, how to raise our taxation powers. All this will be there in the mobilization of resources part. Okay. Now, urbanization as a strategy for GS3, another topic, inclusive growth. Okay. That can be the second target, second dimension. How do we build a city in such a way that it is inclusive and acts as a platform for ensuring the quality of life of all sections of the society is getting better? That is the second dimension that we can think of from GS3's perspective. Why am I first beginning with GS3? Because urbanization is firstly, it is a economic driven need. That's why I'm talking about GS3. Okay. Now, another dimension of GS3 can be infrastructure. So there can be a standalone question on the infrastructure planning needs, investment models, a discussion on the various kinds of investment models that can be deployed. Whether you can, for example, there is this another topic of land reforms. When we are discussing this land reforms infrastructure topic in detail in some other class, we will be discussing this topic also there. So when you're talking about land reforms, you can further link it to GS3 environment, where you're talking about land use change. What do you mean by land use change? This is a concept of environment which is linked to our sustainability. Okay. In short, land use change refers to how we deploy land as a resource and what is its impact on environment. Let's say you're transforming a particular rural background or a rural demography into a suburban and then into an urban landscape. What happens to the demography, what happens to the environment, and ultimately what happens to the social structure at that area. This is the focus, beginning from environment, linking it to society. Same topic. Again, GS3, environment. We'll also talk about the impacts of urbanization on environment. For example, heat island effect. Okay? You are witnessing a concrete jungle where the ambient temperatures, they are significantly increasing. Heat is getting trapped within small islands and that is causing microclimatic aberrations or only in a small set of geography. You'll notice that, in one part of the city it is raining heavily, in other part it is completely dry. That's not the case usually in rural areas. At least when the topography of that region or the geography of that region is uniform. Unless and until there is a very big hill, something like that, a single village will not have so many variations. Yesterday, the maximum temperature record is 30.9. Historically, at this point of time, Hyderabad would have 39 degrees as a normal towards the later end of May. But we have already seen a situation where monsoon, touched Telangana in May itself. This is the quickest. There was a report that, Vikarabad, right? There are Usman Sagar, Himayat Sagar, all the lakes of that region. We are not even in June. By the end of May, they're already filled to the brim. 80 to 90% of the lakes are already filled. We're just witnessing the beginning of monsoon. And in an urban planning, the urban sprawl, where you're filling those ponds or actually, destroying those ponds, what is the concept of catchment area? Let's say, for example, this is a lake. Okay? The water will drain from multiple areas and this together is called the catchment area. Ideally speaking, you are not supposed to construct any buildings in this catchment area. What are we doing? We're actually destroying that place and building skyscrapers. This is not the case only with Hyderabad. It has been the story of every city across the world. Whether it is New York, Mumbai, Chennai, Hong Kong, Shanghai, name it. Wherever there was density of population, you will see the same story. And it's all the more true in the case of a country like India, which has just roughly, I don't know exact numbers, so 3% of the land of the, and 3% of the entire global land, but almost 15 to 20% of the global population. So this variation is another challenge that we have to deal with. So urbanization as a process is primarily about economy, but it has a impact on every walk of our life. You must have watched this movie, Mahesh Babu, Srimantudu, right? So in that movie, you will notice how this rural-urban migration issue comes up. Okay? So taking that movie as a cue, we are moving away from GS3 to GS1. What are the drivers of urbanization as a process? In that movie, you will notice the village headman trying to stop the villagers from moving out of the city, or the village, requesting them to stay back so that they can live together, have a harmonious life in the village. But none of them will listen because they don't have enough opportunities. Here, you will notice the concept of migration and the factors of that migration, both as a push factor, that is, the factors that are pushing people out of the village, and pull factors, that is, urban centers acting as magnets for people who are in search of better opportunities and better quality of life. When I say the quality of life, the word that we are focusing on is quality. But this brings us to a question: do we really have better quality of life in the present phase of urbanization? That's the second question. Okay. So we are talking about a demographic transition where 40% of the population is trying to be accommodated into the cities. That number is only going to increase as we age further. And we are expected, that is by 2047, that is the 100th year of our independence, we are expected to have at least 50% of our population residing in cities and contributing to almost 75% of the GDP. In that situation, if all the money that people are spending will be going into, taking care of the basic needs, this brings us to the ethical question. From GS1, we are moving to GS4, which brings us to the ethical question. What exactly is our value? See, ethics paper is witnessing a change in the trend. Okay. You are no longer seeing questions like, what is happiness? What is happiness to you? Give your example. That's all gone. That's part of the history now. You are now expected to have an ethical justification for every social problem. A case to the point being, they asked how NEP, the National Education Policy, and the ethical dimensions of National Education Policy can change the value system of the next generation. Something on those lines. I'm asking the same question. If urbanization goes in the same direction, in a business as usual approach, what is the kind of quality of life that we are giving to the future generations? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. That values will again bring us back to the. Everything is interlinked. So it's like a continuous process. There is a cause and effect. When the value system changes, we are coming back to GS1. The very premise or the glue that bound the society is getting dismantled, and therefore the social structures will also change. What was the value back then? What did we prefer? We preferred a joint family, and the kind of emotions that a joint family has, despite its pros and cons. There are some good things, there are some bad things. That's a point of a different discussion. But the emphasis here is the change. When an economic process changes the value system, it will have an impact on the salient features of Indian society, that is GS1. Okay? Salient features of Indian society. What are the salient features of Indian society? Caste, family, marriage, kinship. Okay? Then you also have in GS1 syllabus directly mentioned impact of urbanization. Urbanization as a social problem. What do you mean by urbanization as a social problem? See, you're coming to cities to lead a quality life. If that is taken away because people are living in islands of prosperity amidst a sea of poverty, the irony is all the more visible in a uber rich city like Mumbai, where a slum, Dharavi, is right next to a building where the residence cost is nearly 100 crores. In fact, the land in Dharavi itself costs some crores. because of the population density of Mumbai. So this dichotomy works well only when you have enough economic opportunities. In a city like Mumbai, everything is taken care. Because when you wake up, your uh, milk is delivered at a very low cost, your newspaper is delivered at a very low cost, everything is very low cost. The services are very cheap, except the accommodation, the rent, everything that goes there. A normal 2 bedroom flat in a upscale area would cost you nothing less than 2 lakhs per month. Okay, so there are areas like Bandra, okay, where you will see rents going up to 3 lakhs. And in some areas, rents, residential apartments, upscale luxury apartments, the rent goes as high as 20 lakhs per month. Who are the kind of people who would afford 20 lakhs per month? And the people servicing that kind of uber rich people come from places where the rents are as low as 15,000, 10,000, 8,000 in the same place. Imagine the kind of living conditions they have and what is the kind of impact on society. Let's say a kid who is born into such a poor family wishes to become someone who is able to afford 20 lakh per month. What are the barriers? Here you will witness the concepts of caste as a barrier, the importance of family, the importance of education, which is there in GS2. So urbanization can be a lever which can transform the society also. Okay, this is a process, and that process entails a democratic participation of the people, GS2. And democratic participation is not enough. You need to also have governance structures in place, which brings us to the next issue of GS2, that is, should we have accountability from the state governments, local governments? Because at this point of time, most of the urban local bodies, they are at the mercy of the state government funds. They do not have enough taxation powers. But even places like Mumbai, BMC, which is one of the richest municipal corporations in Asia, if not world, sometimes it outcompetes the tax collection of this city, outcompetes even many American cities. And despite that, if there is a rainfall, the life comes to a standstill in a city like Mumbai. Why are we not having enough governance structures? What is going wrong? These are the kind of questions you need to ask in governance. This is the level of complexity of this topic. And yet, people do not understand what is the focal point when you write an answer. They just dump everything and anything that comes in their mind, no matter what paper this question is asked. If it is asked in GS1, you are more supposed to focus on the process part, its impact on the salient features of Indian society, the causes, the impacts, the cause effect, what is causing that change, what is furthering this urbanization agenda. That should be the focus in GS1. In GS2, you're talking more about the policy measures, because GS2's emphasis is to test your legal aptitude, your policy making aptitude. The welfare agenda of the Indian Constitution should be translated into your policies and schemes. How are the welfare schemes implemented? Are they implemented in the spirit of the law? Is there rule of law? Is there an outcome based budgeting? Which brings us back to GS3. So, most of the discussions on urbanization, they are confined to GS3 as a framework where you try to create the cities in the first place. Most of our questions stop at that level. What are the problems in creating new cities? What are the problems on environment, impacts on environment? And what is the kind of money raising mechanism to create and build new cities? This is usually the scope of most questions. But if you deploy this thought process to learn this topic holistically from all perspectives, you can write just about any answer and you know um, probably use this thought process even in your essay. You can try to make it like a story. This so you can explain the entire story of urbanization through the story of Srimantudu movie, Mahesh Babu's, where you begin with a migration topic, then rich and poor divide, inequality. This is an economic process. Once the poor moves out of the city, rags to riches story, economic inequality, and therefore, when you are rich enough, you want to contribute back, but there are governance challenges, politics, GS2. Then there are ethical questions, GS4. So, if you look at anything in the society like this process, you will be able to enjoy your preparation and also look at things. But UPSC is not a place where you can write stories, right? So you have to translate that story into certain key phrases where you can capture those ideas in the shortest possible way. That is the skill that we need to focus on. Clear? If you want to translate your understanding into scores, the first thing you need to know in GS3 is data. What is the data saying? You need to substantiate your claims with data and mention the sources as well. 63%, that's the current percentage of GDP contribution to the Indian economy from the cities. And by 2030, it is expected that the projections are 75%. You have 87 million plus cities. Now here is an assignment for you. I want you to go to the 2011 census. Even this is explained in your NCRTs. Okay? There are certain terms. As per the 2011 census, you have something called million plus cities. How is urban agglomeration defined? What is the difference between urban center, suburban center, city, villages, etc.? How is an urban area defined as per census document? This is the kind of homework that I am expecting you to do. Okay? These definitions are there in NCRTs also. Go back and refer them. Okay? Now, because we need urban centers, it is the prerogative of the government to come up with certain government schemes to facilitate that. You need to know what those schemes are. For housing, we have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban component, PMAYU. And then you have Amrit scheme, which is meant for providing the basic infrastructure. For example, basic roads, basic public needs, public goods, green spaces, etc. And that acts as a foundation. The next layer would be smart cities, where you will integrate technology into urban planning and delivery of public services, both the components, planning as well as delivery, phase-wise development. And India in 2014-15 started to deploy this smart cities mission with an agenda to modernize our cities and envision them to be clusters of economic prosperity, inclusive growth. So you need to look at this as a equalizing agenda also. Urbanization has an agenda to make it a tool of economic as well as welfare welfare is transformation. Clear? Now, when you are talking about the technological integration of urban centers, you need to know some case studies. When you are coming across any initiatives that can solve a certain problem of urbanization, before we get into the technological problems, I want you to come up with the problems that you would see in a city. What are the most important or daily problems that you see? First is traffic. Okay, what else? Sanitation. Okay. What else? Water. Sanitation covers that. What else? Water availability. What else? Pollution. Slums or quality of life. What else? Accessibility as of what? Inequality. What else? Think. Okay, if you're not able to think, I'll give you a framework to think. Think of the entire GS syllabus. Okay, society, geography, polity, economy, environment, security. Can you think of any point? Security? Internal security. Crime. Safe spaces. Crime. What else? There is a Netflix show called Jamtara. You will understand this aspect if you watch that show. What else? Jamtara or Patal Log, whatever. Jamtara, right? Which this component is discussed. Okay. What else can you think? Disaster management. What else? Green spaces. What else? Your idea of brotherhood. What is your idea of quality of life? Your idea of kinship. Urbanism. What is the difference between urbanism and urbanization? Urbanism refers to a description of how you want your urban cities to be like, or it's a description, it's a normative thing and a descriptive thing, both. Now when I say normative, what does it mean? You are trying to tell how a city should look like. So when you have an urbanism theory, you are defining the norms of what an ideal city should look like. And there are prescriptive descriptive sciences also with respect to the philosophy of urbanism, which tries to say this is how a city is right now. So this gap between what is and what ought to be can also be a subject matter of discussion in our ethics. Environmental ethics, that can also be a part. So for each of this, you will see we need multiple stakeholders. Stakeholders. Who are these multiple stakeholders? People is a very generic answer. I need a specific one. Residents. Okay. Governance, yes. Stakeholders, governance, citizens, private sector. See, every citizen will be a part of some group which has a certain stake in this process. So, yes, of course, citizens is a generic answer, but they're also playing some roles. When you have no other role except being a participant in the democratic process, you will be clubbed as a citizen. Every private guy is also a citizen, but his role is not just confined to being a voter. There's something beyond that. Okay? Public private partnerships, resident welfare associations, CSOs, civil society bodies, urban governance structures, the taxation mechanisms, all the public service delivery departments. Governance is not just about policy making, it's also about the execution. The skill of those people. The governance lapses that you see. For everything, it's a problem of participation, that is, there is no will to participate, or there is no consensus on how to solve it. These are the two problems. Either you're not interested, or even if you're interested, you don't have a clue on how to solve it. Broadly speaking, these are the two problems for all these issues. Everybody hates traffic. What do we do? In an individual and a state linked social contract, state is in the best position to solve these problems. And you, as representatives of those state, when you become bureaucrats, should contribute to this change very meaningfully. Traffic problem. You're a bureaucrat. Go and associate with a company like Ola or Uber, which has a real-time traffic data. Maybe you will figure out a solution using AI and IoT. Sanitation. When you have schemes like Amrut, focus first on optimizing your money. It should not be like HMWS and SB lays a drainage pipe, next day telecom department comes again and digs it, which is duplication of effort. We need to have coordination. Again, technology can be a lever. Digital India. Water stress. When you can charge money for a resource like water, that's the price we will be paying for urbanization. And it will also encourage responsible usage of water. Right now, what is the situation? If you dig a borewell, a person who has access to the entire aquifer will suck it out. Why not make groundwater a common resource and charge accordingly? That will make the person use the water responsibly, right? In summers, when water is not available, there are people who use tap water to cool their balconies. As atrocious as it might sound, that is what is happening. Link it to money. They will use the water more responsibly. Pollution. How do we solve this problem of pollution? Let's say Bureau of Energy Efficiency. You make it mandatory for all the buildings to use 5-star appliances in centers, commercial centers, where the power demand is reduced. As a result, your coal burning will also be reduced because most of the power comes from coal. Make it mandatory for National Conservation based building codes, NCBC. I forgot the full form. Building codes, basically. Green building codes. Okay? You need to make it mandatory. There is a concept of embodied carbon, which is the carbon that is trapped in building materials. How do we make it efficient? Planning should go to that level. When you have a decarbonization agenda, every aspect of urban life should be made a part of this process. Governance, technology, planning, financial resources allotment, everything. Clear? So, if you take a look at another data point, we are only spending half the kind of money we need for a sustainable urban agenda. What is that amount? The data says between 2011 and 18, we only spent 0.6% of our GDP when we actually needed 1.2%. We can represent this data point through this graphical representation in your answers. That will help the examiner. All it takes is a simple graph. Need of money. I'm not writing exactly, don't write need of money or uses sophisticated language. Urbanization, financial resources needed for urbanization. Represent it like that. So, I'm also emphasizing on how you present your answers. Clear? Here, you can talk about this IMD Smart City Index. Another data point. See, the facts might change, but the sources will keep on, the sources will remain same. Facts might keep on changing. This IMD is not our weather forecasting agency that I'm talking about. It's a business school. Go and check what this IMD is about. IMD Smart City Index. What is India's role in that? You need to update your answer according to the time period. If you're writing this exam in 27, for example, come up with the latest possible data. Okay? Also, when you are in the class, when I'm emphasizing on points, try to write it down. If you are just clicking pictures with the hope that you will use it, you will not use it. Writing has a role in our cognitive development. When you resort to something called kinesthetic memory, you will be able to absorb it better because you will be focusing on noting down the most important points. Active recall. Okay? If you want to present your answer, whatever we discussed, what are the problems of urbanization? The key word that can be used is fragmented urban growth, disjointed strategies, inefficient urban sprawl, environmental degradation. Keywords, keyword based approach. By using keywords like this, which are there in the policy documents, you will be able to communicate a lot of information, complex information, in the shortest possible way. The fragmented growth exacerbates land use conflicts, escalates transport costs, and intensifies environmental degradation through unchecked urban sprawl. Entire problem is captured in this single slide. The backstory required is elaborate, but exam is not the place to write stories. You need to communicate your idea in the shortest and the crispest possible way and substantiate your points. Coexistence of greenfield and brownfield approaches without integration. What is the example here? Presence of Amravati and Vijayawada, for example. You are also focusing on development of Vijayawada and also developing Amravati, which will require cost. How do we optimize it? We need to think on that lines. Okay. What's the capital of Indonesia? Jakarta. Ever heard of the city called Nusantara? What is it? Anyone? Ravi? It's a new city that is being built because Jakarta is subsiding. There is a problem of land subsidence. Heard of this term land subsidence in news anytime recently? Joshimat. Land is getting sinked. It is getting drowned. Why? Climate change. It is no longer sustainable to urbanize on Jakarta. So we are abandoning, like Indonesia is literally abandoning Jakarta and moving to a new place, which is supposed to be a greenfield project where it is developing green spaces, blue spaces. Blue spaces means like this concept of spawn-city. If it rains, it is not going to become a lake, just like how we are witnessing here. The land planning will be in such a way that water gets absorbed, the drainage systems, etc., will accommodate nature-based solutions where you have pits and ponds which will capture those water storages. Why am I talking about this? Disjointed strategies, inefficient urban sprawl, environmental degradation. For all of this, nature is the solution. We need to go for nature-based solutions. Keyword. This is the problem. Then what is the solution? Nature-based solutions and green planning. Example, Nusantara. Substantiation is also done. You also have examples in India also. There is this new city coming up, Naya Raipur. Okay, you can note this point. Use this as a case study. All this is fine. Who will give the money? That becomes the next problem. How do we present it in a sophisticated way? Fiscal constraints. No money. Okay. Governments finance 72% of the urban infrastructure. Private sector participation is just 5%. See, cities are supposed to be the engines of economic growth. And private sector is supposed to work for profit. When you have such huge economic opportunities, there must be something wrong that the government is doing because the private sector is not participating. What do you think can be the biggest problem? Like someone mentioned, what is the first problem of urbanization? Land. The biggest problem for lack of private sector participation is the kind of harassment that they might face. Land litigation. So a solution for this, what is the solution? We already have enough laws, and that's why we have litigation also. Simplify the processes. Okay. What is the prerequisite for that? Digitization of land records. Okay. Now let me ask another question. Under whose control land will be there? Which government? Land, Article 246, Schedule 7. Which list? State list. Which brings us to another problem of federalism. Because there is no coordination between the center and the states. Now, if a state has to evolve and grow, what can be the best bet? Cooperative federalism. So, what is the Finance Commission, 15th Finance Commission, saying about urban grants? What is the difference between a grant in aid according to Article 275 and other kinds of devolution. The kind of devolution that you get from center to the states. Conditional transfer, unconditional transfer. This is one aspect. Okay, you can look at the 15th Finance Commission grants, etc. in this process. So that is one dimension that we need to prepare on. Okay, this environmental stress, etc. is a problem that we already see. We've already seen. We have already discussed this waste mismanagement problem also. Okay, in one of the class. So in the future, we will see water scarcity, air pollution as standalone topics. Okay, from mains perspective. We already discussed the problem of urban inequality and social exclusion. This social exclusion is not just class driven. The primordial identities of Indian society like caste will also exacerbate this exclusion. Here we discussed a concept called intersectionality. Do you remember? Intersectionality. What do you mean by intersectionality? Multiple vulnerabilities converging together to make it even worse. Caste, inequitable access, economic access. Let's say, for example, you also have this problem of physical disability. Women, all the traditional barriers, patriarchy, casteism, urban inequality, all of them clubbed together will get even worse in a situation like this. So there needs to be a sociological component in the urban planning so that people are made to feel like participants in this governance process. Dharavi, despite being the largest slum in the world, exists because it serves a functional purpose to the functioning of Mumbai city. It is the supply conduit of cheap labor that will serve the rich. So if you take a look at it as a sociological issue between the rich and the poor, there is no conflict, as much conflict as we would imagine, because it is offering an opportunity for all sections of that society. Yes, there are inequalities, and yes, there are opportunities also, relatively better than other places. But it's a moral and an ethical imperative to ask, is that the kind of life that we should encourage? Yes, there are opportunities, but isn't it basic human right to have clean sanitation? Because during COVID, the most miserable life was that of the people in Dharavi kind of slums in urban centers, because they did not have access to, forget, you know, sanitizers. They didn't have access to water. They didn't have access to clean bathrooms. And that cannot continue. That's an ethical debate that we can have. Okay? So what is the strategic solution? Please note this word. Polycentric urbanism. Take the case of NCR. You have Delhi. Okay? On one front you have Gurgaon. Gurugram, as it is now called. On one hand, you have Noida, you have Faridabad, okay, you have Ghaziabad. All of this are integrated to Delhi, and together this is called the National Capital Region. Okay, now when I say polycentric, at the center you have Delhi, which is like the core city, but there are many such urban agglomerations which are connected through something called the transit-oriented development, where the connectivity factor is the Delhi Metro. And despite this, the living conditions in Delhi are not as desirable as they should be. That's a different case because it has got more to do with urban challenges or urban governance challenges rather. We need to have climate adaptive solutions, infrastructure, where concepts like circular economy, green building, renewable energy, water management systems are all integrated into the urban planning. Okay? What is the way to express it? Mainstreaming climate risk into urban policies and infrastructure needs so that we have ecosystem based adaptation strategies. Please note this two words: mainstreaming climate risk and ecosystem based adaptation strategies. Using this phrase will help you communicate the importance of integrating climate issue into urban planning in the shortest possible way. Mainstreaming climate risk into urban infrastructure through ecosystem based adaptation strategies. What is the impact it will have? Enhances microclimate regulation. What do you mean by microclimate regulation? Local area, you will not see issues like heat islands, stormwater management. You will not see lakes on the roads when there is a small rainfall. Carbon sequestration, where carbon greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted are sucked back into the system, the earth as a system. That is carbon sequestration. And aligning urban development with India's nationally determined contribution targets. Where will you see this? Paris Climate Deal and net zero pathways. We have something called long-term low emission developmental strategy where we are trying to protect our environment. So finally, you make urbanization as a part of this decarbonization strategy. And that is how we build cities which are resilient to the future needs, which are also inclusive. Okay? That is the whole concept of urbanization. You explore these dimensions, add up the latest facts, case studies, especially with respect to cities like, say, for example, Pune, which is known for its traffic management, Vadodara, which has an integrated command center for the urban planning and other aspects. Okay? So this is how you have to collect case studies, use technology and make this issue a holistic 360-degree view. Okay? This completes your entire topic of urbanization. Prepare a short note on this and you will be good to go and write mains. See you.